Listeners of the Silicon Dreams on Radio Zindagi, we have with us today Deepak. And Deepak has had an illustrious career, starting with World Bank and more recently leading Invest India, a $1.5 billion fund of funds that helped kickstart the startup ecosystem. And that was also an advisory and also something that kickstarted the Startup India movement as we know of it today. Deepak, I would love to ask you, tell us something about Invest India, what you have done in the past 8 years that has seen the startup ecosystem in India grow by leaps and bounds.
So Sonia, first, thank you for getting me to be with you on this one. First, I must clarify. So that $1.5 billion fund is not an Invest India fund.
Got it, okay.
Invest India is an entity which was created by the government, and it is the National Investment Promotion and Facilitation Agency of the Government of India. Essentially, its primary job is to help any investor who's looking to come into India, to showcase the opportunity to them, to sit down with them on their business plan, to help them get the approvals, to help them get it grounded in India, and then also to handhold that entire business with them as they were going through the India journey.
Perfect.
So that's what is the primary focus of Invest India.
Got it.
And within that focus, it works across all sectors, across all countries, across all investors.
Right.
An additional part of Invest India was also to be the execution agency for Startup India.
Right.
But before that, I must clarify that my entire tenure with Invest India got over in March 2023, as you know.
Which was just a month ago.
That's right. It was a month ago. Now, the second part was Startup India. So as you know, the Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, launched Startup India in 2016, January.
Right.
And from that day on, the execution arm for Startup India was Invest India, within which they were trying to develop the entire ecosystem and to ensure that the entire objective and the dream of the Prime Minister to make India one of the top leading startup nations of the world gets executed. And it's right there for us to see that within a short period of about 6 years, India today is number 3 in the number of unicorns, number 2 in the number of startups,
Yes.
and number 1 in the number of startups adding every day. And this is a huge shout out to the Honorable Prime Minister. The ability in which they created a policy with much stakeholder consultation and then a very diligent process of executing that policy. I think it's a case of a business school today, where how in a short period of time from policy to an actual result and an outcome has been created by the government and by a leader.
And in India, policies typically move very slow. We have behemoth organizations. I think for Startup India, it was executed at a record-breaking speed, just looking at the ROI coming out of it.
So, Sonia, that's a perception of the past.
Okay.
I think everyone has acknowledged what has happened in India since 2014-15, ever since we've had Mr. Modi take charge. Policy making and policy execution today are class examples of success. Everything is based on the evaluation of an outcome.
Perfect.
And the most interesting thing is that it is being monitored at the senior most levels of the government. So you're seeing huge outcomes coming out, and that is where we are seeing, as you know, Tim Cook said when he was in India last month, that it's a story which an extraordinary run and an extraordinary journey ahead.
Right.
And that explains how this entire policy making and execution and management has happened. And let me give you a little idea on that. I think what's unprecedented is that since 2015 until today, India has moved ahead of Russia, Italy, Brazil, France, and the UK.
Yes.
In the size of its GDP.
Yes, we are now a 3.5 trillion GDP roughly, and that makes India the 5th largest GDP on the face of earth, which going from double digits, coming down to single digits is a huge jump. And there aren't many trillion-dollar GDPs in the globe. So for India, that was the first landmark. But since then, we have, especially from our journey from 2 trillion to 3.5 trillion has been nothing short of phenomenal.
And add to that is the fact that the pace at which you continue to grow.
Yes.
You see, so it's not just the mass, it's the velocity at which it continues.
Right.
And that is what we are looking at. So if you notice, even when we entered the COVID, we were the fastest growing large economy. We are out of the COVID and we remain the fastest growing large economy. And the way it is looked by all estimates, we are looking at a number of anywhere around between 30 trillion plus by the time we are 100 years, which is in the next 9,000 days. But the most interesting part of India is 90% of India will be constructed in the next 9,000 days. I'll explain that to you. You said we are 3.5 trillion today. In the next 9,000 days, that'll be about anywhere between 30 to 35 trillion.
India got its independence in 1947, so 100 years from then is going to be 2047, which
15th August 2047.
15th August 2047, which would be about 25 years from, because sometimes it's hard for people to do the days math.
On the 9,000 days?
Yes.
But what is interesting is you're going to be adding anywhere between 27 to 30 trillion dollars in 9,000 days. And that will be opened and added to the balance sheet of each and every one who partners with us in this journey. Think of that amazing opportunity, which it is for every partner out there in the world. And I must add to that India today is one of the most open economies on the planet, with the private sector having the ability to play a role in each and every sector of my economy.
Yes.
And that goes in line of what Prime Minister Modi always says, that there's one world and one family. What we are doing in India is not just for India and the best for Indians, but also for the entire world, which partners with us.
I have a question for you, especially since you are part of the government, right? Now, we have seen China grow by leaps and bounds as well, and the Chinese per capita GDP is far ahead of India's per capita GDP today. That being said, the Chinese have created a closed ecosystem. So some of the companies that are in China, like Baidu, etc., and we know China has also closed its doors to outsiders coming inside, but folks in China are able to interact with the globe outside. How do you think India's execution strategy, right, over the next 2 decades, as we are talking about, would stay true to being a global hub that allows for bi-directional exchange of information value economy?
Sonia, every individual, every society, every nation has their own journey.
Right.
And I'll talk about ours. I think one of the primary objectives, and this is where we see the Honorable Prime Minister's entire concept of taking it forward, is to empower each and every Indian into a growth engine. Now think about it. We are at 1.5 billion today, the highest human resource on the planet.
Yeah, we just exceeded China a couple of months ago, so now we are the most populous nation on planet Earth.
Now this 1.4 will be 1.6 on 15th August 2047. 21% of the world's workforce, 20% of the world's middle class will be in India. Now look at a growth model where you've empowered each and every of those 1.6 billion citizens of India. Just look at the power of the energy and the collective growth and transformation it is creating. And we are already seeing that happen. Because for the first time in our history, one very essential pillar of this growth and India's future, and by the way, one big thing which is happening in India today, is that the Prime Minister is creating India as future ready. And the big part of that future ready pillar is essentially the course of digitization. He launched Digital India as a mission in July 2015. In a short period of 8 years, we today consume more per capita data than the US and China put together. I already explained to you that real-time transactions, which is one of the biggest indicators of the movement of a society, both on the economic, social, and inclusion fronts, 41% of the world's real-time transactions in 2021 happened in India.
That's a huge metric. And guys, when we're talking about real time transactions, we are also referring to financial transactions. As you know, today around the globe, money moves over SWIFT. And if you are living in US, we don't really have a federal protocol over which money is transacted. That is what the US government is actually pushing forward with Fed now, just now. However, India already has UPI, and UPI has not just been adopted across India. And when Deepak talks about adoption of digital India, we are also talking about digital payments. In the past 5 years, India has seen massive growth, and I'm sorry, I don't know the numbers, but we have experienced this massive growth where even a street vendor can now accept digital payments. And the most important part is by enabling these transactions over a government funded protocol like UPI, there are no transaction charges that are deducted. So if I send 50 cents, and trust me, in 50 cents, you can still buy a lot of things in India. So if I am sending 50 cents to a vendor, the vendor gets exactly 50 cents, which allows for people to come forward and adopt this. And the beautiful part is, a lot of this infrastructure works without one of the parties having access to the internet. So even if the vendor doesn't have immediate access to the internet, as long as the payee is able to transact over the internet, we are able to get there. India also has one of the cheapest data rates today. And it would be surprising for those living in the US or in Europe that in India, for $10 a month, you can get 1.5 to 2 gigabytes of mobile data at 5G speeds every single day. Yes, not a month, so this is not a slip of tongue. Every single day, people get access to 1.5 to 2 gigabytes of data. Deepak, I do want to ask you one thing, especially going with the narrative of empowering every single person. In India, middle class population, when we look at the bell curve, most of us fall in the middle class, and the middle class has access to information, and they have access to a decent education system, I would say, in India, and some access to opportunities too. However, we have seen the poor live in this vicious cycle of poverty where generation after generation, their kids tend to just take up the professions of their parents. Do you think this vision for India that we are painting could perhaps put us in a place where our per capita doesn't just grow up in number and is not just advantaging the top 1, 2, or 5%, but rather across the population, we can see a growth in terms of health benefits, knowledge, and also creating a more diverse environment where you have more females in the workforce, and also the people from these stratas that have not been able to break through them are able to move upwards.
Sonia, first I must compliment you. You very well explained the real-time transactions part. Let me just give you a little few numbers on that one, which will show you the pace at which India is changing. So as I explained to you, 2021, 41% of the world's real-time transactions happened in India. We did 48 billion.
Wow.
China was number 2 with about 17, 18 billion.
That's a huge difference, guys.
But let me tell you what happened later. Last year, 2022, of that 48 is now 89 billion.
Wow.
China is still at 17 billion. So if you add all the countries from number 2 to number 11 after us, they still add up less than what India has done. That's just to give you the scale and the pace which it is changing. But I think you've raised a very interesting point. Digitization is not just about money transactions. Digitization, the most important element of it is democratization of opportunity, democratization about the access to that opportunity.
Absolutely.
And democratization of being able to partake from the advantages of the growth of that opportunity. And all these three is what is empowering that 1.4 billion today and 1.6 billion going forward. And I'll give you an instance on that. I spoke to you about Startup India. Close to, I have 95,000 registered startups with the government of India. We started with just about 400 odd, and that was just about 100 months ago. Of those 95,000, close to half are from tier 2, tier 3 cities and the villages of India.
That's amazing.
That's the first part, where we are seeing every small town and village becoming a growth engine.
Yes.
The second part, 47% of those, of my 95,000 have at least one woman director. And more interestingly, the fastest growing segment of startups in my smaller towns and cities are the ones which don't just have a woman director, but are actually owned and led by women. I have 7,300 of those already registered with me. So what I'm trying to explain to you is showing that how this democratization through digitization is changing the complete landscape of India, where growth is concerned, and is now empowering and bringing each and every individual into the fold of the future of India.
So thanks for sharing those numbers, because I am an engineer by trade, so I love working with numbers. So out of 97,000, 95,000 plus startups, 7,000 today are led by women. Is that right?
7,300
7,300
from my small towns and cities.
From the smaller towns and
Because
cities.
let me correct, 47%, as I mentioned, of those 95,000 have at least one woman director.
So when you say a director,
that's in a senior CXO position.
In a CXO position. Okay, all right. So here in the US, right, we have seen issues with women being funded in general. In 2020, 2021, only 2.2% of the overall funding, which was in the tune of even $600 billion for startups, only 2.2% of that went to women. And then last year in 2021 or 2022, that number was actually down to 2%. How is the investment landscape in India favoring women? Do you see an inherent discrimination that happens? And the reason why I'm asking this is because some of the best growth venture funds in India, like Sequoia, that has their India arm, are being established by people who come from US. So the question is, do you see those biases transfer to India, or is India a new age ecosystem where we actually do not see these biases in play, but rather it has provided a more level playing field for everyone?
Sonia, inclusion is big in India, and it is one of the primary objectives stated by the Honorable Prime Minister. And we are seeing the results of it. I'll give you the instance of my own Invest India. We have more women than men in Invest India to begin with. But even on the government policy side, there are a significant number of policies which have been created to promote women in startups, from funding to getting them access to government orders and marketplace and all kinds of things. And that's where we're seeing start results coming out of it. I gave you those numbers, but let me give you another statistic. If there is a woman in a senior position in a startup in India, the chances of it getting funded are over 70%.
All right. That's actually much better than
that
the chances
itself,
here in Silicon Valley too.
And that itself shows, and as I also explained to you, some of my one of the fastest growing trends in my small towns and cities is women owned and women led startups. So this game has begun, and inclusion is huge in India. And the kind of initiatives taken by the government and initiated by the Honorable Prime Minister himself, from their daily lives, from getting them, for the cooking gas, for example, from the small elements of that, freeing that lady in the village and getting her time to do other things, to helping them get admission in schools and colleges, to helping them getting funding for their startups, and not just the fancy startups, but small, somebody starting a handloom business, a small textile business, a small food business in a village, the self-help groups of women getting together, helping them, getting them technology, financing, market access, everything. That is what is now being seen as a great outcome of what is happening in India.
So folks, you're listening to the Silicon Dreams and Radio Zindagi. I am Sonia, the founder and CEO of Orbis 86, and also the show host for the Silicon Dreams. And we have Deepak here with us, and we are having some great conversations. Deepak, I want to wrap this up with a couple of follow-up questions. We did talk about democratization of opportunities, and India is growing in its GDP. What I would like to ask is, why has India taken a more regressive stance than some other countries, like even European countries, and America is also no exception, when it comes to the adoption of cryptocurrencies? And America, I can understand, because the position of the US dollar is actually threatened by cryptocurrencies being adopted for global transactions. But when it comes to India, why do you think we have such a regressive stance towards decentralization? And the problem problem, I hope that the problem doesn't go to, decentralization or blockchain being used to launder money, because honestly, we just went through a round of demonetization, and cash is what is used more often to launder money. On the blockchain now, it's become nearly impossible to launder any money without being, traced back to who you are. So why is India being regressive in terms of taking, in fact, jumping on the bandwagon? The cryptocurrency market is $1 trillion economy by itself, and India has a great workforce to actually push it forward.
So I'm interested that they use the word regressive. Let me just change on that one. I won't exactly call it regressive. See, there are two elements which you brought. One is the technology side, which is blockchain. The other is a currency. The blockchain as a technology is
We are
now being
adopting it.
adopted by the government in a very significant manner.
Right.
In fact, a large number of government functions are looking at blockchain and seeing how it can be incorporated.
And that's the same in China as well, guys.
So, as far as technology is concerned, I think it's extremely welcome. The other element is using it as a means of exchange. And there, I think it is very critical that you got to safeguard the interest of your citizens. You need to understand the nature of whatever it is well, to understand how the evolution and what point of the evolution is that in, before you can bring it out to everybody for their use. Because please understand, in every society and in every country, everybody is at different levels of adoption of technology, every different levels of information, and every different levels of understanding of a situation. You do want to see that there is a proper sense of evolution and a grounding before you want to open it up to everyone. I think it is in the interest of each and every individual and citizen that every country takes a position when they have to take a position on these things and create a policy around it. So I don't think it is regressive by any nature. In fact, if you look at it, it is being something which is what a government's core function also is to ensure that you protect the interests of each and every citizen of your country. And at the same point of time, bring in new ideas when they are ready to be adopted and at a point where you think they are in a position to be incorporated.
I was just very surprised by, first of all, the finance minister saying that, hey, we are not going to allow any cryptocurrencies to be transacted. Then changing that to the narrative that cryptocurrencies would be taxed as capital gains, which is fine. So, people have a legal way of still trading. However, you cannot claim any capital losses on cryptocurrencies. And I was like, what is happening? Because, if you're able to claim and pay taxes on capital gains, you should also be allowed to claim any capital losses. But it is nice to know that this policy, I hope, is not going to be what's going to set the tone for us for the next 5 to 10 years. What I hear from you is, as we are figuring things out, we are making those incremental changes to create something that is easier for everyone to adopt.
I think every government is doing that. Every policy is a part of the evolution.
Russia and China, they are threatened,
And
so they have completely
regardless
closed
of the point, I think it is always as a part of the evolution, and this is just one of those. But policies would change many ways, policies which concern us in our daily lives, in our personal lives. So as the society evolves, policy evolves.
And the very last question I have is, a lot of this has been under our current government, which is in its second term. And I'm just wondering that tomorrow, when handshakes happen and governments change, and right now, under the vision of the current leadership, we have painted a roadmap for the next 20 years. We had Vision 2020, and then we have Vision 2030, and so on. My question is, if the leadership changes and switches hands, do we have a robust system in place right now? So this unprecedented growth rate that we have seen, I mean, I don't expect everything to 2x or 5x or 10x every year, but also, are we established enough to ensure that the next set of government leaders who come, they keep contributing to this growth versus trying to stop it for any sort of political agendas?
See, Sonia, it's very interesting when you talk about democracy. But by the way, I must tell you, we and each and every individual and citizen and politician and government official is working towards increasing that pace of growth and not just keeping it there. So when you're saying 2x and 3x, hopefully it's going to be more. But I'll tell you what is central today, which has happened in India. And a large part of it, as I've seen, has happened especially in the past 10 years. Today, good economics has become the center of good politics. And as long as that remains the core, and that will remain the core, because that is decided by the number of people, by the individuals and the individuals which are there. And today it is a society which is a highly aspirational society. And please also remember, we are the youngest nation on the planet.
Yes.
At the average age of 29, we will be the youngest all the way, at least for the next 50 years. The aspiration, the dream of each one of them is the same as yours in here or anywhere else in the world. And that's what has brought about the change of good economics as the center of good politics. And regardless of who comes in power, that will remain the motto for the government to take it forward. But as I see it, I'm sure I see this government being in the saddle to a time where we can execute our policies in the best possible manner.
Yes, it does make a lot of difference when you have government leaderships established and leading the country for a few years back after back. Can you just wrap up by giving a message to the entrepreneurs in the Bay Area that are still of Indian origin, and some of them also still are Indian nationals, as well as to the entrepreneurs in India? So the messaging that I am looking for is the entrepreneurs in India, how can they get support from Invest India? And on the Indian entrepreneurs abroad, how could they get support from Invest India?
I think Invest India is open for everyone. For the Indian entrepreneurs, they know they help them right through the process, and that is also for any international entrepreneur, anywhere, looking at a journey in India. Invest India will be your partner in India.
So how
and
do
it
they
will
go
be a
about
first.
it?
It's very simple. You go on the website, have a look at Invest India, send a message, and you will get a relationship manager who will work with you.
And that is true for anyone sending a message.
Absolutely.
So that's guys, for a country that is the most populous on earth, 1.4 billion plus humans residing in a single country. That is actually greatly efficient, being able to respond to every single message that is sent out. And again, remember, there are over 95,000 startups in India today. So Deepak, the journey and whatever Invest India has done so far is nothing short of amazing. And thank you so much for bringing your knowledge and expertise from your roles at various functions to help propel this forward. And it was an honor chatting with you today.
Thank you, Sonia. It was an absolute pleasure, and keep holding our flag high. We need that.
Thank you.
Thank you.